Thank you, Lisa.
All right, we're recording.
All right, we're going to call to order the meeting of the Joint Review Board for Thursday, June 27th, 2019. Roll call, we have Chad Weidinger.
Present.
Bob Matthews is excused, and we have Gina Van Egren. Present. Brent Waker is not here at this time yet. Diana Ellen Becker is present, and Cale Plazinski.
Here.
All right, we're going to move on to the approval of the agenda. I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
Motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
All in favor? Or there's been a motion by Chad and second by Cale. All in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes. Move on to the approval of the minutes.
Motion to approve the minutes of October 4th, 2018's meeting.
Second. So we have a approval by Chad, second by Gina. All in favor?
Aye.
That is approved. Yeah, you keep it up with this?
I know.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
I should have saved it, slow down for you. I'm gonna rattle right through it. All right, we're gonna move on to the regular business, and that is the review of the Tax Increment District annual reports. What you're gonna see in your packet in front of you is the reports that are submitted to the state, and it's really 3 pages for each one of our TIDs. But because those, I think, are a little bit difficult to read and to get a good summary of it, you are going to see a legal-sized paper that really summarizes the rest of the packet. And we put it all on one page. Thought that would be easier for us to look at and to review. If you don't have any questions, we might just start right off with TID 4. Kevin and I are going to kind of bounce back and forth, probably talk about financials, and then Kevin's going to talk about if and when there's what's going on in that TID, any updates, some changes. So TID 4 is kind of downtown is our Washington Street Apartments is really what the name of it was at the time. Started off with a fund balance of 193. We had increment of about 514,000. Had some little bit of other revenues. We had debt service of 475. Some other expenses. So it ended with a fund balance of 180,000.
And I'll throw, if you have questions like kind of where they're at, I'll throw the maps up here. If you have any specific questions about projects as we get in, certain things, certain developments, have to explain kind of, where that increment's being generated from or what's causing the financial situation.
So just to recap on TID number 4, in that area, it looks like it has a positive balance, so the projection is positive in the near future.
Yes.
Okay. And then the administrative costs seems very, very reasonable.
Yeah,
So,
there's not a ton for us to administer on that one.
On this one in particular, through 2018, we were paying $50,000 to downtown Green Bay, to the backstage at the Meyer. And starting in 19, our administrative costs or the other expenditures are going to drop down to about $6,000. So that was a couple-year agreement for the Meyer. And so that will end in, it has ended now in 19, we won't have that large expense. Just for the record that Brent Weiker has joined us in your packet.
Sorry, I was on second.
Nope.
I think I was early.
And is the intent of the TID, is it to close it down early, or is it going to run the course, you think?
It will probably run its course. We still have some debt service for the Cherry Street ramp. We provide spaces for Washington, for that apartment in there, so that TID does provide some funds for the Cherry Street ramp bonds.
Just to clarify, you said that this was the last year that we'll see that, next year this 50,000 will not be there?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, so then the debt service will remain relatively flat in the next couple of years as what it was in 18, but again, the other expenses will go down to somewhere closer to the $6,000 annually. Any other questions on TID 4? We can move on to TID 5. TID 5 is one of our older downtown TIDs. Started off with a negative fund balance of about $896,000. We had increment of almost $8 million, a little bit of interest, some exempt computer aids. We had development agreements that we had revenue coming in of about $57,000, and we did borrow about $2.1 million for TID 5. As you go into the next item, section, the expenditures, we did spend about 1.2 million. Most of that was on land acquisition in what we call our shipyard area. We also had debt service about 1.4 million. We paid out about 46,000 in developer grants, and then we also had 151,000 in some other expenses. Leaving us at this point, because we borrowed more than we paid out in the 2018, we did end up with a positive fund balance of about 398,000. We did borrow about a little over $2 million, and a large chunk of that was for the Stantec, which was our, is it an architect firm for the shipyard area. And a lot of those expenses were not incurred in 18. We'll see most of that probably in 19.
And then, just really quickly, your future revenues, those are real captured revenues or those projected revenues?
Those are projected.
Okay. But those are all from things that you currently have or things that you think you may get?
Just increment, because it's over $2 million per year in tax increment. Just tax increment alone is going to be about 18 million. Revenues, we do think we're still going to borrow more money for the shipyard, which is about $5 million because of new development we're going to see in the shipyard area. That is driving us up to about $24 million. We have a little bit of exempt computer aid, some interest, and that's what's bringing us to about the $25 million of estimated revenues.
Okay.
Some of that, and we'll get to the end, will probably shift because we're going to talk about a new TID for that shipyard area. But in terms of, I think, Diana's, the projections for this area, I mean, are projects that are already online. We're not anticipating a big new project coming down the line, so it's existing.
Okay. I just wanted to, that's what I thought.
Yep.
I just wanted to make sure of things. So are you going to do like an overlay TID, or are you just going to close a section of it down? Or?
So, yeah, I'll talk about the end.
Oh,
One of
sorry.
the,
That's right.
kind of like some of the proposals about how we might probably have a few nips and tucks to go through.
Okay. Sorry about that. Yeah,
Yep.
you did say that.
Yep, no.
No, that's okay. Any other questions on TID 5? All right, we're going to move on to TID 7. That is our Lombardi, Ashland
Oh,
area.
sorry, I got one more thing, TID 5.
Oh, yes.
There's potential projected development, our Adams Street lot. This is out for RFP right now. We're trying to get developed on it. It's not based on any of the projections. I don't know if right timing this would come into a new tax increment discussion, but this is a lot that's owned by the redevelopment authority, has zero taxes on it right now. We had a request for proposal out for some development. We'll be looking at it again this fall. So that could be some potential revenue. Nothing is built into the projections, but it's a development site that we're trying to push forward.
Can I ask you a question? So with the sale of Craig Dickman's company, Breakthrough Fuels,
Yes.
are they still committed to building in the
Yes.
shipyard?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. So we've had, some discussions with them, and now US Venture brought into the fold. We'll talk a little bit about that and kind of the TID proposal that we're doing down there.
Okay.
But yes, they will continue to move forward on that piece. All right, sorry about that.
Nope, good. And we're going to move on to TID 7. Again, Ashland and Lombardi. That had a positive fund balance of about $248,000. We had tax increment of about $731,000, some other miscellaneous revenues. We had debt service about $253,000, $13,000 out for developer grants, little miscellaneous expenditures. So we had a nice increase in that TID in this year because most of our debt service fell off compared to previous years. So we are sitting at a fund balance of about $712,000, and this one is projected to do well going forward. At this point, we don't have any large projects in this TID.
I'll talk a little bit about, kind of this is another one identified, potential early termination. We do have infrastructure project that we're looking at in terms of part of the Legends District plan and part of the project plan talked about pedestrian infrastructure in this area. I mean, if you've been to a game or something at the Rush, our plan is to look at putting sidewalks throughout the area. Kind of covering here, there's been complaints from the property owners, and been out there in the winter, it's a safety issue, people walking in the streets, the cars in the snowbanks and things like that. But that will likely be probably our last projected expense in that area. And they could work on the process to wind that one down.
Sorry. So I would just like caution, because we did this on military, and then this other one, those two TIDs went into decrements, because you spend money and it wasn't as pay as you go, so you do this beautification, and then no one shows up, and then the TIDs go upside down, and so I just try to.
In this one, we did already project, DPW came back, so they figured it'd be about top $700,000 to do sidewalks. So I already have that in the
Yep.
projection.
Oh, you did?
So again,
Oh,
they're
so it does
they're
count.
So we
sitting
would pay
at,
with cash.
Okay,
yep,
that's
they're sitting
fine.
at, well,
Okay.
700,000, we figure we'll be over 1.2 million next year if we take the 5 to 700 for sidewalk, we'll still be at a very positive balance, and then that's the only expense, so we will be paying with cash in this
Okay.
TID.
So you guys really changed how you've been managing your TIDs?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
We-
Well, that's,
Yep. Now to build it, and they will come
okay.
approach.
Well,
I mean,
okay.
very rarely or strategically have we put money up front.
In the last couple of years.
Correct, yes. Yes, correct. Mhm.
Any other questions on 7? Otherwise, we'll move to 8, which is our Burger and Morrow area. We're sitting at about 1.669 or $1.7 million. We had tax increment about 297,000. Some miscellaneous revenue. Debt service is about 167. Miscellaneous expenses, we're sitting at about 1.8 on this item. At this point, we don't have really any of the additional expenses going on in this TID.
Are you projecting to close this one early at all?
This is one, yep, that we're gonna talk about
Yep.
winding down early.
I remember this one.
All right, any questions on 8, other than, like I said, Kevin will give us a recap at the end of some suggested changes for these TIDs. We'll move on to number 9, which is our University Heights. This one was build it and they will come, which didn't happen. We are at a negative 1.4, almost 1.5 million fund balance. We had increment of 178. Some miscellaneous revenues. We have debt service of 218,000. So our debt service is larger than our increment. So we are slowly building that fund balance. It's actually getting slightly larger. We're sitting at about $1.5 million negative fund balance in this fund. This is out by the I-57. It was supposed to be a new industrial park that did not take off.
Oh, is this where FICO is?
So FICO is here, but they are right outside to the west of the TID. They're in the town of Scott. This was one that was created really kind of right when things were going gangbusters in terms of development, 2002,
Two is when the TID was
2003, 2004, and then recession hit and just things did not move forward out here. From a development perspective, initially this was projected to be a lot of the zoning is for big box commercial, which again, right, we know retail's changed and then how that's been built. We've tried to push in the last few years, more industrial uses out there. I think there's a perception issue that this is just too far. Even though, right, once you're on 54, 57, it's not that far. But we, despite efforts of bringing people out here, just cannot get development moving. They would rather be in I-43. And that's why we're starting that process of trying to expand I-43 because that's where the businesses want to be. So this is one that we're going to project or look at options for closure, but it's going to probably require some allocations from others to be able to close it down. It's starting, we're 2/3 of the way in and it just, the projections, the ship will not right itself.
One gas station couldn't even make it out there.
No.
Yeah. That's a good investment for you.
We just got things, they are planning, I think, to reopen this fall, somebody
Oh,
else
good for
bought
them.
it, so.
Well, you can capture a lot from the Kiwani folks and Luxembourg folks from coming into town.
Yep.
I think it was too soon, too fast.
Yeah, but if you look at all the charts in terms of even like town of Scott, the population growth, how it was going really from the late 90s up to 2000, and then since then it's just flatlined.
Right between 2003 and 2006, they spent, there was about 3 different bonding requests for land acquisition and a infrastructure and an interceptor. So they spent about $4 million on infrastructure and nothing. We had no increment to go along with all those expenditures.
We put on an interceptor out there. Wow.
I think 2006.
Oh.
Any questions on TID 9? There's been a lot of efforts by the economic development area and to try to get new businesses out there. It's just,
I think after, right, coming aboard, giving it a college try after 3 years of, right, kind of making a concerted push, we've kind of seen the writing on the wall, and it's just, like I said, this one is not going to turn around.
And you don't own the land either, right?
We own a chunk of land. Again, I'm not sure why we purchased. We purchased this piece of
Wow.
land back in here, but actually it doesn't have any access onto Algoma Road. Yeah.
okay. On that note, we will move on to TID 10. That is our Main and Mason. We had a positive fund balance of $444,000, about $188,000 in tax increment, some miscellaneous revenues. We did pay out about $85,000 in developer grants, some miscellaneous expenses, and we have a positive fund balance of $539 in this TID. This one is making some slight increases annually.
Some of those increases, we did a development agreement for redevelopment rate, I guess, southeast of like where the Cops and Planet Fitness is. The redevelopment, the Arby's, Familia Dental, and the North Shore
North Shore. yeah.
Bank that are in there are fully online now and generating some of that additional increment.
Correct, and I think the development agreement that we paid out was actually for the Planet Fitness. I think the other pay-goes will probably kick in next year. Any questions on TID 10? We'll move on to TID 12. This one has a positive fund balance of 4.575. We had a tax increment of 1.576, 1,576,000. We had some interest, some exempt computer aids. So you're going to see a large expenditure on the capital, under the capital and land expenditure side. That is our infrastructure on Erie Road. There was a small purchase of land, but most of it was all infrastructure. We did have some debt service. We had some developer grants that we paid out, some miscellaneous expenses. And so that fund balance did go down 3.5, down to $3,451,000. But again, this is a situation we paid with cash, some additional infrastructure. And the largest reason that infrastructure was needed was for the large expansion of Nature's Way. So we're going to see some nice, this one even on the increment, we were at 1,576,000. Next year, 2019, it already bumped up to 1,789,000. So it already has about a $200,000 increment. And that's just, you know, that's Nature Way is owning the property because they bought some land that the city owned. And so that we're going to see some nice increment in that TID 12 area.
This is just a rehash from last year, basically.
Yes.
Yeah, so
Yes.
you purchased the land, and this one you're likely to close soon, though.
I think we will finally, I know we've been talking about, but have a path. I think to kind of get to your point about the infrastructure pieces is we're trying to use some cash that we have on hand in here. You know, Diana mentioned doing Erie Road. We got down to here, then we hit a creek, so I had to wait for the DNR. Our goal is basically from here down to the city limits, this will be done. So that when we look at expanding or doing, I would say, a new TID to do like a new business park over here, we can use some of the money that's in here that is covering the same area to pay for that infrastructure so they don't have to start that one in the hole like University Heights.
Any questions on TID 12?
Do you project when you're gonna make close?
So potentially, I think I've said it's set to close, what, 2025? I think when we've talked about this before, we've talked about like 2021. The way the increment is coming in. And again, we're trying to get, as we know, construction costs have probably jumped even in the last year since we started talking about some of these things. But if we can pay for some of these things with cash, I think we have, what, $3 million allocated this year?
Yes.
In the cash flow for continuation of that Erie Road and also running additional water and sewer out that way. There's some sewer lines that needed to be run down in here, on Erie Road. That basically will open all this up then to development. Because right now, this was kind of the end of the line, the last parcel for like water and sewer service, to be able to like, in terms of our capacity. So if you were out there, right, last summer, this was all ripped up, we were getting an additional sewer so that we can develop that. And again, like I said, we're trying to pay for it, the money we have on hand now, so that we can then shut it down and open a new TID potentially.
Does
Really
it-
for,
Is there any, I mean, does it cash flow enough where you can just like do some of those prepayment stuff sooner to close her down a little bit
So-
sooner? Because originally, I think we talked, because we donor tipped that, I think, 2 or 3 times. Would financially right thing to do.
right.
But for some reason, I thought it was gonna be like 20 or something.
So we have to talk a little bit about what those numbers are. We need to use this for one more donation for TID 9 to keep that one from hitting the levy. And that would be the reason for pushing it from 2020 to 2021.
Okay.
Yeah, because this one is, tax increment is coming in at about, it'll probably be about 1.8, 1.9, and we will need that potentially to cover.
Right.
Okay. And then okay.
I apologize, Gina, this is Kevin Bonk, a director of
Oh,
Bonk.
hi.
He is
Yeah.
the development
Just the
director.
guy, I'm just the intern at the computer.
I apologize.
That's all right.
Thank you.
And so then we'll move on to TID 13, which is our other large downtown TID. That one has a large negative fund balance. We're sitting at $3,235,000. We do have tax increment of over $2 million. We had some exempt computer aids. We had debt service of about $1,449,000. We had some developers payments or grants of $428,000, some other miscellaneous expenses. So that fund balance did get slightly more favorable, but we're still sitting at about $3.1 million unfavorable. This is our large downtown TID. Our Northland will come online. That will have a positive impact on this one.
Yes, that got its certificate of occupancy at the end of 2018, so it was on 1/1/19, but now fully operational, or became fully operational in February. And so, yeah, 1/1/20, will be fully assessed and basically, I mean, we'll provide a good amount of increment. I think in terms of the debt that we put in there, I think it was only $2.5 million in terms of project grant that came from the TID.
That expenditure already happened in 2015, so
Right.
that went out long before we were going to see the increment for that expenditure.
So if you haven't been in, it's awesome. I think it's worth the wait of what we've gone through, to get this up and running again. Again, you mentioned there's some smaller projects in here. One of the other things that we'll talk about in terms of potential modifications to this TID, Associated Bank lot. We are running out of parking in the city. And so for a short-term fix, looking to, acquire this lot, but also as a development parcel potential to fit in to help service some of our downtown businesses. Also the KI Convention Center, if you see, go back to the TID map. That's in there, and we also have in a development agreement that Main Street ramp is due to come down within the foreseeable future, and so we're gonna need to look to find some ways to provide for parking. So to potentially expand this, we're just close away. I mean, it's going to service this area, but I think we may look at potentially bringing it in as part of that short-term parking, but then long-term development site.
So, Kevin, the Associated Bank, 157, that's actually for the bank, not for the lot, right?
The what?
On page 2, you have the developer grant amounts for Associated Bank, 157,400.
That's back for their project out at
Yeah.
Regency Center, is what
Okay.
they call it.
But,
Yes.
so you didn't use any TIF dollars to purchase that, did you?
So this, we're going to look at using TIF dollars for this to look at providing infrastructure for the rest of, we need parking to service the rest of the parcels in the TID. And so that's, in terms of, we're looking at exploring that option of using those dollars for that. Part of the TID 13 plan talks about putting money into parking. And so that's one of the things that we need for this area. We don't have room in any other spots, so that's what we are looking at for this purchase.
Any other questions on TID 13? We'll move on to 14, it's our North Broadway Larson Green area. Most people know that that's where the rail yard area is, the cannery up on Broadway. Start off with a negative fund balance of $580,000. We had increment of $151,000. We also paid out some developers payments. I'm sorry, we received developers payments. We also had some large debt service of $426,000. We also paid out developer grants of $453,000. And so we ended with a negative fund balance of 1.1. This is a situation where we did have a project grant that we are paying for. Now we're going to see the increment with, even next year, we're already going from 151,000 increment to 274,000. So there's a large jump coming in. We're seeing some of those things that are on Broadway that have come online now. This is a situation we had to decide whether or not we should take a bond for the payment of the developer's grant, or we let this one go into a negative fund balance. The difference of paying the additional expense or knowing that this one will turn back around in a few years. We chose not to bond for this one, so that is why we have a negative fund balance.
So part of the grant, this project is, the tax increment district covers, the whole rail yard. And so what you've seen, as Dan was talking about, you've seen the continuation, the building out of the southern warehouse buildings, A, B, C, D, E. I'm looking at you, just trying to think.
Yeah, he was, yeah.
They're all
Yeah.
under in there. So, this has moved into office space, a little retail space, restaurant space. The development agreement that was passed the other year will look at doing additional renovations in the warehouses to the north, buildings R, S, and T. So again, you'll see more of this type of development using these warehouses. You also see under construction some townhomes. The first phase of those is underway right now. Some owner-occupied condominiums. So there'll be 7 units being constructed this year and coming online with the potential to expand that and add some additional. Also in there at the very north end, kind of where you see all those trailer trucks parked, we did a development agreement to build Broadway lofts. This is an affordable housing project. So it's an expensive project. It's not going to assess out super high because of the rents that are in there, but it's in terms of providing housing for all in the city, we felt it was a very important project. And in terms of the development, this will provide 109 units in between this building here, and then there's 2 townhome type buildings that'll be at the north end of the parcel. And they're set to break ground later this year, but will be online 1/1 of 21. We're going to talk about this a little bit. One of the things that we'd like to do with this area, some of you are here where this went through the whole, drama with, if that's the right word for it, on Broadway owning the property, the Walmart saga, and then basically the city or the redevelopment authority ending up getting it. With that, we lost 2-3 years of development potential because we were dealing with this. So we're going to be looking at extending that to 3 years and potentially adding in a few parcels. I know there were some, the developer purchased some CN parcels to be able to expand a little bit. Showing here. In this area here, there's some abandoned railway that was purchased, so we need to make a territory amendment to add those parcels in. It's not a lot, but you have to be in the TID in terms of where there's a portion of those condos that fall into it. So that'll be one of the things that will be.
Is there
on the
any
docket.
concern, so they're developing the condos in there and then they're doing those residential?
Yep.
That Light Park isn't owned, it's actually owned by a private company, so if they build or erect something there, is there any concern from people who are purchasing those that's an issue?
So I can't speak directly because I'm not selling. One of the things we've talked about, I think you talked about, is it's basically this line right here. So the city owns this from here, and this is what we lease. There's still 7, 8 years left on the lease. There's some things that we have in terms of control with zoning or entitlements that could help shape some of that. I think one of the things they've also discussed is how they're orienting those buildings. They're doing so in a way, so even if something were to go up here, they're oriented in a way that still keeps the view and the focus, basically kind of drawing a line like where our property line was, and like back into the property, so that you're still keeping kind of that view shed back where you want to look at that downtown area. I think one of the things they looked at is, all right, in terms of also you develop this site, you want more than one story, but at least the shorter buildings here, getting to the taller buildings in this place, you're kind of angling down so you still preserve some of those views. I think that the other part that they looked at is also, it's an expandable condominium, so in terms of you get further north, there's still opportunities, depending if something like that would change, to change the product or change the style or do some additional elevation to be able to get up above something if something were to come up there. Did you want to speak any more on?
No, I think
Yeah.
it actually, if you ever get in the condo, you can see it kind of does angle. You don't really even look back towards the north. You look really south. They usually have open houses on farmers market days too.
Okay.
That is our TID 14. We'll move on to TID 16, which is our Military Avenue. We started with a negative fund balance of $583,000. We have increment about $271,000. Some computer exempt aids coming in. We had some debt service of $33,000, $40,000 for a developer payroll, miscellaneous expenses. We have a negative fund balance of $373,000, but we are seeing that fund balance, negative fund balance go down. Also next year, even in this district, we're going to go from $271,000 up to $326,000. So we have a well over $50,000 increase in tax increment due to some new development that happened in the military area.
Just one project in here, still early stages, but there is a new owner as of last year of Green Bay Plaza in the Sears. Just kind of early stages of gathering together some tenants. It's actually mostly leased up. We can look at some redevelopment opportunities for the Sears piece and also that massive parking lot in terms of some developable outlots. So hopefully either later this year or next year, be able to see some projects move forward on that.
Any questions on TID 16? We'll move on to TID 17. It's one of a very small one, just a couple parcels. We have a negative fund balance of about $62,000. We had tax increment about $7,000. Some miscellaneous expenses. Still at a $68,000 negative fund balance. There's not really much activity here.
This is one I think we discussed a little bit last year. There's still pending legal action on one of the development agreements. Hopefully that's going to get resolved one way or another in August. That just gives us a little clarity. We have the process started to close this one down, but based on kind of the outcome of that case, will kind of give us some better options on how exactly we're going to do that. It's not a whole lot of funds, right? But it's something that we just, it's not doing anything, so there's no reason to continue to keep it open.
That was 17. We'll move on to 18, which is our University Avenue. This is the new Festival Foods, the Quick Trip. This includes the JBS site. We have a negative fund balance of $937,000, and this is a situation again where we decided to pay out an upfront grant and not borrow for it, knowing that we're going to have some increment to come in and to offset it. Again, that was a intentional decision, and not to pay that extra interest on this TID. So we did have increment of $328,000. Debt service was was very, very small because we didn't actually borrow much for in this area, and we did have a $761,000 grant payout that was to the JBS site for remediation, some other miscellaneous expenses. So it does put us in a negative $1.4 million balance. But again, this is one that once these upfront grants are going to be paid off, within a couple of years, we'll have enough tax increment to offset the grant payout, and then there is some pay goes on the back end once they are fully online, and then we'll see the development, and we'll see an increase in the fund balance in this fund, or this TID.
So, yeah, Diana mentioned the JBS project. They're moving forward with the development. If you've been out there, they got a building fully up and completed actually last year for the school year to provide some student housing. When this is all done, they're projecting somewhere between 340, 360 units. So they're continuing construction now. Should probably have another building or two open and online this year. And they still have some space reserved kind of in the front area for some commercial development. I didn't have slides in here, but festival, there's one outlot there remaining. There'll be a project moving forward with that. Later this year, the temporary parking lots, there'll be some additional development there. And then if you followed, there's some consternation about Burger King coming in, but some redevelopment there and just some smaller pieces. But those were the biggest one is the JBS, really coming forward. I think as Diana said, is in terms of just using our resources wisely, if we have some cash available, I think one of the things that we've done when it comes to upfront money, we've also changed policy a little bit. It's not just like, all right, cut a check, here you go. We pay basically expenses as they come in, and in many cases, we'll pay the contractor directly. And so that is right for there's certain eligible TIF expenses for demolition, environmental remediation. I mean, and we're getting those and paying them. So we've got a better handle on, one, that money is really used for particular things, but also it helps us kind of spread out across the year in terms of cash flow, making those payments on time without having to take a big dip.
All right, any questions on TID 18?
Can I ask you another question about your future revenues?
Sure.
Are you factoring in like an equalized value growth in that too, or is that just?
I'm sure right now we have an assumption of a 2% build in on the taxes, plus we build in any additional assessed value that we are aware of that either haven't come online or we expect, because as the JBS, within their development agreement, it talked about every so many years they're going to have more assessed values, so we have built in those expectations within it. And again, we need that tax increment to help pay for the grant up front. And then that is also within assumption, and then on the back end, they will get some pay-go, so we have projected what we think their pay-go will also be. Same thing with Festival Foods also has a pay-go.
Yeah, usually Bob always talks about, if you have a spreadsheet, we can look at it, and it's a little bit easier to see that
He told me to
way.
rely on you today.
I was just waiting for you to throw the stuff you normally throws in, so, okay.
So what are you saying, you would like to see more details?
It's
You would like to
helpful.
see cash flow?
Yeah, it's a helpful tool, because you can look at it like in 2 seconds and just really know everything you need to know as opposed to talk. Although this is a little bit more comprehensive than what we normally get from other areas, so it's nice.
Yeah, I think, Dan said, we were trying to build in, I guess, right, since past of everything's gonna go gangbuster. There's real projects that are happening and building in, a modest increase in tax amount, and then the big jumps really coming from projects that we know are happening. And I think, try and build some conservative assumptions. I think JBS we had rolling in over 5 years.
Correct.
I think they'll meet those targets based on the schedule they've been at so far, but I mean, it does allow for, right, kind of a dip in that to move forward. Part of also with the JBS, the pay-go piece, the way that deal was structured is they only have to get, probably I think to like year 1.5 or year 2 in terms of phase 2 to really be able to pay off the debt service and make that right side up. So anything after that, that's where the pay-go piece comes in. So if they don't build it, well then we don't pay it.
I just had a quick one back on 16.
Oh, sure.
The GB Plaza on the projection, is that included in the projection?
No,
No.
there's nothing included in there right now.
Because we have nothing, no
There's
hard
no
numbers.
defined- Yep.
So nothing at this point is built into that one. No expenditures, no, for payouts, but there's also no upside on the increment at this point. TID 19 just got opened in 2017 without, so we should experience no increment yet in 18. We did have a negative fund balance of about $33,000, has some miscellaneous expenses, so it did go by the end of the year to a negative $57,000. This is an item even for 2019, we are going to experience tax increment of $152,000. So this one will be a positive fund balance by the end of 19. Let me double check that before I say that. This is our East Town Mall. We had some big projections for this area. At this point, they have not come to fruition yet, so actually we're not really sure which way they're going. But this is a situation, there was a upfront project grant, but they had to do certain, they had to get to certain milestones and they didn't get to them, so we have not paid out any dollars, and then the rest of it is all pay-go. The one that did come online is what used to be the old Cub Foods, which is now the Marshalls, the PetSmart, and what's the other large one?
First PetSmart and,
There's a Glamour Nails.
Yep.
Yeah, I think Ross.
Ross.
Thank you.
Yes, okay.
So that one did come online, and so that one is where we're seeing the over $150,000 worth of increment and some other small changes within this TID.
Yeah, there was, Aldi did some renovations to their store, the Dunkin' Donuts came in, that was a parcel that had nothing on it before. I think that's one of the things too with, again, trying to protect ourselves with the East Town deal. There were some funds available up front for demolition and mediation, but they didn't do certain things, so we never put any money into it. We still continue to work with them, right? As you know, the retail market is tough and putting together, the right amount of tenants, and you get one and then they don't want other certain tenants in the same development. They're still working on it. Most likely we've said they would have to come through probably for a new development agreement just because so much time has passed and we've had probably, 2-3 amendments to extend the time frame. So they still own the property and, in terms of just, with that, it's not creating more increment, but we're also not putting money into it as well.
So that is TID 19. Those are all the ones that, all the TIDs that were required to have an annual report. Since then, we have created 2 new TIDs in 2018. We had a TID 20, which is our Whitney Park. And then, I don't know if you want to talk anything about that.
So, right, part of it, the reason we come to you to ask, for your blessing in creating these tax increment districts is because we feel like we've got projects that are ready to move forward. There's projects that need some financing. So, once we establish these TIDs, I think our goal is maximize the increment. And so I think TID 20, has been off to a good start. If you go over to the Whitney Park neighborhood, you will see Whitney Park townhomes are underway. This was down at the corner of Van Buren and Cherry. We had RDA owned some vacant property and then developer picked up some parcels. So you'll see 4 new townhomes there with the goal of continuing to bring some new townhome products into this area. 4 now, hopefully 6 to 8 in the near future. If you go around the corner, you'll see 901 Main. This, next to the Greyhound station, was a vacant lot that the Redevelopment Authority owned. So you'll see going up right now, 901 Main. That'll be 20 apartment units. That'll be open later this year. And then Whitney School, you've probably seen a lot of work around that. That's a 2-part project. One is to take the inside of the school and convert that into 23 apartment units. And then also build a dozen townhomes around that perimeter. The apartment should be online by the end of the year, and then the first townhomes will probably get breaking ground soon. So there's a lot of development in here. All of those projects are all pay-go projects.
There's no upfront money.
So hopefully within a year or 2, start coming online and generating a lot of increment for that district.
And then our the other one was TID 21, which was done for the Green Bay packaging, and that is really no upfront cost. That is all going to be pay-go.
Correct. If you've been out there, it's a crazy construction zone. I mean, you see cranes all over the place. But yeah, they're moving forward on a pretty aggressive schedule. You've probably seen there's the addition to the container the box plant here on the northeast side of Quincy and Radisson. And then you'll see they're going to construct the new mill, basically out in the front yard of the old mill, construct the new mill, and then somehow within a very short period of time, basically kind of transfer production there and then take down the old mill. So just, I don't know if there's any other questions on those two?
No, right, so that would be potentially, if we would want to potentially receive and place on file, unless there's any questions on the
Yeah, just,
reports.
can we just jump back to TID 13?
Of course.
So I know I'll get some questions from the executive.
Mm-hmm.
So on that parking lot that you're purchasing from Associated Bank for like how much, 1.2 million?
Mm-hmm.
So how did you purchase that then?
So we,
Like what funds did you use to purchase that?
I'm gonna have to talk to Diana to see what exactly account we use that from. I know when we talked with our council and RDA, we had a few different sources. We wanted to keep it off the general fund, so we looked at potentially using our tax increment district to do that, or we also looked at our parking utility in terms of, they're kind of an enterprise fund, so we looked at, okay, which account would we use that, because we really didn't want to incur additional borrowing on the levy.
Okay, but you don't know if you, okay. So do you know where you got the 1.2 million from?
Well, we were going to, I guess, I was going to be charging to the 453, the TID 13.
So 453.
Which is, that's our fund number, which means that our TID 13.
Okay.
And then, so at that point, we were going to, because the parking utility had talked about whether or not they would take it on, and since it was going to be owned by the RDA, at that point, they decided it probably made more sense to have that it would come out of the TID, and then any revenues for leases, leases on a potential on ATM or on the sign, any of those revenues then would go back into that TID to offset the debt service for this.
So the RDA or City Council approved
Yes.
using TID or the parking utility to purchase it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that was back December of last
Because
year.
we had a 12/31, we had to
Correct.
make a decision.
Correct.
Okay. And then, obviously, this is our sore subject with accounting. And then the other issue is, you guys have been talking quite a bit about, pay as you go, not making the same mistake as possible, but yet here you're spending $1.2 million on a fixed asset that's not going to generate any revenue, so you're making an expense of $1.2 million that's not bringing the revenue to cover the cost for
So-
property taxes.
Sure. So with that, part of the reason that we did is because we feel we can have some short-term uses on it with leasing out parking spaces in order to help generate revenues to pay the debt service on the interim until we use it for a development site.
So the 13, so for TIF 13, what was so you're using funds out of that, or are you bonding for?
We were going to be bonding for it.
So there is no funds to pull from, so,
Well, at this point, it's being covered, where we cash pool, so it's really coming probably out of the general fund, or it's actually coming out of our investment reserves, until we borrow, because our request is going to the council in July of where to get to borrow for the money for the 1.2. Because we have not done our 2018 borrowing request. So we have not borrowed the money yet for this parking lot.
so
The
the,
request- go
so
ahead.
the city council, here, okay.
So the approval for in December was to move forward with purchasing the lot. At that point, the decision had not been made on what the funding source was going to be. And that we had a finance committee meeting last Tuesday, and at that point, they had given permission to move forward with the bonding request of 1.2 million. So that has not gone to council, that is going to our July 16th, that I think is our next council meeting. And that is when we'll get approval to move forward with borrowing the 1.2.
So the city council approved the purchase of it, but they didn't approve the funding for it?
Source.
Okay.
They didn't designate a funding source.
Thank you.
They approved the 1.2 million, but did not specifically specify the funding source from which it would come. And I think that's where the discussion about parking utility versus TID versus general levy.
So, yeah, so just,
Yes.
let's just set that for a second. But the issue is, I think you guys have done a really good job of like, pay as you go and not making a lot of the same mistakes. It just all of a sudden throwing this one big thing, it kind of defeats the whole purpose of, hey, we're just gonna do pay as you go, we're not gonna make these large investments without tying it to some larger, development. It just kind of goes in face of what you guys originally had been talking about. So that's it.
No, I'm,
And if
I
I didn't say
understand.
anything, you know what?
Yeah, no,
Okay.
look, and I think, right, I mean, it's obviously been a point of contention between the city and the county, over this lot. I think one of the things, we've discussed is I think we have some options, to not put us into a long-term, right, from behind position, to be able to generate, I guess, two things. One, that it is a short-term hold in terms of some development opportunities on the site, that it wouldn't be, right, we're not buying this piece of land to like hold it forever. But I think in terms of the market, comparing this piece of land versus the piece of land we bought off University Heights, I think the market's a lot more ripe here than it is out there. But secondly, I think we have some options in terms of generating some revenue on it in that interim to not expose ourselves to that debt that's out there.
Okay. And then just one last thing for the
Sure.
record is when the county purchased it, we bought it for basically $1.
Mm-hmm.
And the deal was that we could hold it until there was a development, so, there was really no need to purchase it because through us and Associated Bank, you would have controlled it for development, so you would have had to make a $1.2 million investment. So just for the record, and then we can just move on.
Okay.
I mean, it's fine.
Okay, yeah, and I'll just say for our record, I mean, given the agreements that we had in place, like, we were between a rock and a hard place, and we had to make a decision, and that's, I guess, the decision that we
No,
made.
that's understood.
Yeah.
The other financial comments I wanted to make is in coming into the 2018 year, 1/1 of 18, there was that change to personal property, and that was locally assessed machinery and tools. It was an item that no longer was going to be locally assessed, and that hit us hard on TIDS. We had just over almost $16 million worth of assessment that went away with the state. The state has changed it where we no longer locally assess personal machinery and tools, and that was over $16 million, which was about almost $367,000 of the increment that we did not get as we got into 2018, and we'll continue to not have that. And then on the same note, and we experienced that on our general, our assessed, that are for the general levy and for our TIDS, there were many, because this is a self-reported, personal property self-reported, so you can either put it on line furniture or fixtures, you can put on machinery or tools. Machinery and tools is only one of the lines, one of the categories that are right now no longer going to be taxed for personal property. There was a lot of switch from people who were doing furniture and fixtures, personal property, and they switched the next year to machinery and tools. So not only did we lose over the $16 million that is no longer being assessed, the state has changed that, we also lost an additional, I think it was about $11 million, we think roughly, that got switched from one line to another. So the full impact is probably over $27 million with assessed personal property in our TIDS that are no longer being assessed because they discontinued the personal property portion of machinery and tools. And again, that's over potentially $500,000 or increment in 1 year. Just thinking about this.
Yeah, so I know the state made you whole.
They made us partially whole, correct.
On the general fund, but on the TIFs.
So our TIFs for 2017, It was $15,665,000. The increment for 2017 was $357,000. We had got aid of $195,000. So in 2000, from 1 year, the difference between the aid and the assessed value, we're in the decrement of $166,000. And again, that's only taken into consideration what was reported in 2017. Again, we also believe that there was a large switch from one line to another, so that is additional loss in assessed value, which we did not get any aid for. So again, that's where I feel that it could be as high as $500,000 in increment that we lost due to the personal property change. We had the same experience on our general fund, but we're talking TIDs here. So what I did want to say though, in 2017, we had increment of just over $6 million. And then if you see in that was 17, and then 2018, you see $8,039,000. So we had a nice increase in increment. From 17, we went from $6 million, and into 2018, we went to just over $8 million. And 19, we are going to go about to 8.4 increment. So we have seen some nice steady increase in increment and growth in our increment in our TIDs. So many of the projects that we've had in the last couple of years, we're finally starting to see them come online, and we're starting to really experience the growth in our increment.
Yeah, I think we were trying to do some reverse math and figure within the tax increment district for that year, we realized probably about $86 million worth of new development. So this is, kind of going back, you got to trace yourself back a few years, right? Money received in 2018, which is from projects that came online 1/1 of 2017, which means these are projects that were probably hashed out in 2015 and 2016 in terms of those development agreements, coming online and now, right, there's always that lag period, but finally starting to see some of those, generate some increment for us.
So I don't know at this point if we want to take a motion to receive and place on file the reports, and then I believe, Kevin, you had some additional information that would go to the second item. I would entertain a motion to receive and place on file.
Motion to receive and place on file.
Second.
So we had a first by Chad and second by Brent. All in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Nay? Approved.
So just provide some context. I think this is a good opportunity before we kind of go through the formal process of cycle that we've done the years past. I think we'll have Kayla reach out again and maybe coordinate some dates to have these GRB meetings. I think it's been more effective when we meet and take care of all the TID actions at once instead of meeting separately for each individual TID. But I just kind of want to give a heads up of some things that will probably be on the docket so we get a kind of sense of where we're going, or if there's questions or concerns that we can address them going into it. So proposals for two new tax increment districts. Council approved a resolution last year to start the process for this one. We do TID 22, which is the shipyard. Generally, this would be the area north of Mason Street along the waterfront. The redevelopment authority owns almost all of the land in here, so there's like zero tax value on it right now. But it would be the slip, some area between the tracks and the Badger sheet metal property. We're talking about, again, timeliness, the future development of what properties come in exactly. But we would look at creating that TID for new development in that TID to help support the shipyard projects and some of the borrowing we've done for that piece. So you kind of get a sense right around that area that we're developing. Moving forward, you'll probably see dirt moving out there very shortly. We're working on finalizing our concept plan for the shipyard piece. Just kind of the concept plan from which we're working from. And then on the north side of the slip, Breakthrough is working on their headquarters. Even though they've been acquired by US Venture, they would still like to keep this as a separate entity and believe for their employees this is the right spot to be. So working to work on their headquarters. We'll also be breaking ground later this summer. So those are some of the projects. Then again, there's some additional sites in there. There's some additional vacant land, Badger sheet metal, the White Store. I mean, there's some other properties in that area that we feel will be development ready once our project is up and running. The second one, this is down kind of where TID 7 is. I'll explain a little bit about that. To do some properties in what we call the Legends District. So this is basically our border transition area with at Schwabenon. So just to the east of the Resch Center, the new Expo Hall, and Lambeau Field. We moved forward earlier with a project called Legacy Hotel. So they are taking down the old Brett Favre Steakhouse and going to put a new high-end all-suite boutique hotel in its place. And so part of that, we'd like to create a new tax increment district in this area to capture this parcel. And as you'll see, this is the borderline with Schwabenon, but we have a lot of vacant parking lots and vacant land that we've been in discussions with some future development projects in that area. TID 7 is older, getting ready to retire it, and so in its place, I think we'd like to transition out to a new tax increment district. So, kind of what we've looked at then, based on these, potentially TID 5, doing a territory amendment to actually take out some property in the shipyard area. I think whether we talk about an overlay or actually some of that area which isn't providing any value right now to start new with a fresh TID and kind of, it's a pocket down there, right? I mean, it doesn't have much value, there's no obligation, so potentially to take that out of the TID to cover with the new TID 22. TID 7, which is the Lombardi Ashland around the Tundra Lodge. Potentially, and again, as we start to put our numbers together, our goal is to limit impact on all of our levies, right? I mean, we don't want to have funds come back. And so we've talked about like TID 9 is the one that's going to be tough, and then we may look at some allocation amendments to be able to close that down. So potentially for TID 7, we talked about some infrastructure projects that will happen this year with the paying for cash for the sidewalks, lighting and things. But with that, to look at any funds available to do an allocation to TID 9 to help ease that. One of the things we've also talked about here, in order to reduce some of our bonding, the state a few years ago passed the ability for us to do an affordable housing resolution, which allows you to keep the TID open 1 year and use all those funds into an affordable housing fund. We think basically this could be a complement to, if not maybe eventually replace some things we do with our neighborhood enhancement fund, where we go out and borrow. And so what we would do is you can structure it that you basically say, all right, I'm going to close this TID in 2020 in terms of from a project basis, leave it open for 1 year and use the increment to go into an affordable housing fund, and then it will be fully closed 2021. And so what we would like to do is be able to, I think, help some of our bonding capacity in terms of, or reduce some of that. So ones that we're closing down, looking at having that year in there, but kind of building that into the termination resolution. Doing the same thing with TID 8, that was at Borgen, Morrow area. Again, potentially using some funds to allocate to TID 9, doing affordable housing resolution increment for a year, and then closing that one down. TID 9, closing it. As you can see, just some rough math right now, it's about 1.5 million in the hole, and it's got 1.6 of outstanding obligations in terms of future debt service, so it's going to take a substantial amount to close that. But if we can get some funds to do that. So we'd like to do maybe the same thing with TID 12. Again, additional funds to help close TID 9, affordable housing resolution, and then get that termination done. TID 13, potentially looking at a territory amendment, project plan amendment. I think that is going to be determined kind of maybe where council decides in July, right, from where they'd like that funding to go for the Associated Bank parking lot. I think we also have looked at some other parking options in terms of where we're going moving forward with the KI, so that may be one that's on there. TID 14, which is North Broadway, basically the rail yard area, amending the territory to include the rail piece that was purchased and a resolution to extend it. Basically, again, as I said, to kind of make up for the 3 years that we weren't really able to do anything or it wasn't generating increment because nobody really owned it. TID 17 to finalize that termination once we get the legal issues worked out, and then creation resolutions for 22 and 23. So it could be a pretty full docket. I think what you've seen, if you look at the last ones that we've created, 18, 19, 20, 21, I think we've tried to be more strategic about these districts and how we create them. Probably gone are the days of like the TID 5 and TID 12 where we just like put a whole bunch into the TID and just see what was gonna happen. And we try and build these with, development projects that we know are real, and then, in terms of projections, we feel, could build it in value or are gonna go through a period of growth. With that, some of the other ones I talked about, 7, 8, 9, have they've gotten to the point now where we've, fulfilled or close to fulfilled, a lot of our outstanding obligations. So, out of respect of creating new TIDs, would like to do the process to shut these down, so we can still stay, within our capacity for doing tax increment districts. I think we're what, 6%?
I was just gonna say, the second last page in your packet is just a recap of where our tax base is, where it started, and what our increment is, but at this point, as of 2018, we're at 5.35% of the 12% test.
So, just kind of a heads up, just some things that we were thinking about. I think we've got, we kind of played this last year, right, waiting to kind of see where some of these projects came online in terms of what real increment we're at, but I think we've got some pretty reasonable projections in these districts to kind of know, all right, with some certainty, the ones that we can start to wind down.
Motion to adjourn. Sorry, I'm late for a meeting.
Oh, that's okay.
Do you have anything else to say?
No, that was it.
Oh, okay.
No, I just feel it's fair to kind of give you guys a heads up
I just-
of like what we're
okay,
talking
okay.
about.
I try to be courteous, I waited until you was gone.
Yeah.
All right, so we have a
Second.
motion and second to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, great, thank you.
What? What?
Take
Why don't you guys just fight right now? Just fight it over.
It's.
See you later.
Thank you, thanks, Jack.
See you guys later.
Bye.
Bye.